Hare Krishna. Welcome. Welcome to the 16 Days of Activism for Safer Communities. This is a campaign brought to you by the ISKCON Vaishnavi Ministry. We're really honored to have His Grace Anuttama Prabhu. Hare Krishna Anuttama Prabhu, thank you for joining us. And Her Grace Vishaka Devi. Hare Krishna Vishaka Devi, thank you for joining us. Before we continue, I would like to invite Vishaka Devi, could you please lead us in pranam prayers to Srila Prabhupada?
Thank you, Govinda Priya.
Hari
Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvisesa Sunyavari Paskyata Deshatarane Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Panchakalpa tarubhyascha, kripa sindhubhya evacha, patitanam pavanebhyo, vaishnavebhyo, namo namaha.
Jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you so much, Vishaka Devi. This is the first of our series of panel discussions where we will be addressing the topic of, we will be discussing how Srila Prabhupada is the person Bhagavat. Today we will be addressing discussions on leadership and protection as the foundational relationship with Srila Prabhupada, who is our founder Acharya and the preeminent Shiksha Guru. And why is it vital that we do not separate Srila Prabhupada's instructions from who he is as a person? In the 7 purposes for ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada states to bring the members of the society with each other and nearer to Krishna, thus to develop the idea within the members and humanity at large that each soul is a part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Based on this very instruction, we feel inspired to have this conversation with 2 wonderful disciples of Srila Prabhupada who have dedicated their lives 5 decades or more to serving and committing themselves to the movement that Srila Prabhupada started, being compassionate to the society. So it's my great honor to welcome Anuttama Prabhu. Amongst so many services and so many hats that he wears, Anuttama Prabhu is the GBC, that is the Global Duty Officer of ISKCON Society. He is also the Director of Communications and the Board Director of Bhaktivedanta College. He has participated in so many interfaith delegations and represented ISKCON in so many levels. So it's such a great honor to have you here, Anuttama Prabhu, to give us practical insight as to how we can understand Srila Prabhupada's instructions and apply them in our day-to-day lives here. It is also my honor to welcome Vishaka Devi. Hare Krishna Vishaka Devi. She was the personal photographer for Srila Prabhupada. She, as an accomplished author, she has written 5 books, and one of my favorites and a best-selling book is The 5 Years and 11 Months. That such beautifully describes her interaction with Srila Prabhupada. She is also the current temple president for one of our prominent temples in UK, Bhaktivedanta Manor. So thank you so much for taking the time and being with us here today. I wanted to invite both of you to this panel to discuss how we can understand what it really means to have Srila Prabhupada as the founder Acharya. And how do we understand Srila Prabhupada's compassion when he traveled 7 oceans at an age of 70 to share this knowledge, to encourage, to fan the spark in everyone's heart to take up to the process of bhakti. When other saints were actually moving to Vrindavan to follow the principle of renunciation, Srila Prabhupada, seeking compassion within his heart, he traveled overseas, crossing 7 oceans, which was actually not very common for a sannyasi to do at all in that time and age. How can we understand this beautiful mood that Srila Prabhupada had and how he expressed his compassion for all living entities? Anuttama Prabhu, would you like to share a few thoughts?
I was thinking ladies first would be most appropriate. Vishaka, why don't you answer this first one and then I'll share some thoughts.
Well, recently we saw at Bhaktivedanta Manor, we celebrated the day that Srila Prabhupada boarded the Jaladuta, first time that he left India. That was in last August, we celebrated that. And had this long, arduous journey by sea, by cargo ship to New York. And I was reflecting on his life prior to boarding that cargo ship and how the early part of his life was really steeped in devotion, especially by the influence of his father, Guru Mohanday, who Prabhupada described as a pure devotee of Krishna, and who supported, encouraged Prabhupada when he had an interest in worshiping Radha Krishna, when he wanted to do his Rath Yatra festival, when he went across the street where he was living to observe the worship of Radha Govinda there in the temple. So his youthful life was fully steeped in devotion. And he said in his own words that when he went to college, that lessened, because he was absorbed in his studies, he was less involved in these devotional activities. But from the time he met his spiritual master in 1922, those activities revived. And he was so taken, so struck by the potency of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur that he became completely dedicated to his service from the first meeting. From the very first meeting, he said within his heart, he accepted this personality as his spiritual master. Formal initiation came later, but from that first meeting, he said to his friend who had dragged him to see Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, afterwards he said, the mission of Lord Chaitanya is in the right hands. So from that foundation of pure devotion, he became fully dedicated. And from his dedication, what we find, it grew into a determination that was unbreakable, iron-like determination to give the message of Lord Chaitanya to the English-speaking people of the world. And in fact, he expanded it. So he gave it to all people of all languages. I think his books now are in 86 languages. So that was his compassion. It stemmed from devotion to dedication to determination to fulfill this instruction from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. It was truly an extraordinary trajectory and such an inspiring trajectory that Srila Prabhupada went on.
Govinda,
Thank you.
if our first comments are starting with appreciation for this extraordinary person who has changed all of our lives in such a wonderful way, I'll just mention, and you can go online and look at this, a few years ago, at the Harvard Center for the Study of World Religions was held a special function on 50 years of Krishna Bhakti in the West. And if you look online, I don't recall the exact name, but if you just Google Harvard Hare Krishna 50th anniversary, they come up with a beautiful 17-minute film. It was done by Krishna Leela of Karuna Productions. And in the opening remarks, the keynote address was given by Dr. Thomas Hopkins, who's since passed away. But he mentions in there that he says, as a historian, we look for comparisons. And he said, if we're here to look at the influence of Bhakti over the last 50 years throughout the world globally, we look at the contributions of Bhaktivedanta Swami. He says, not I say, he says, Dr. Thomas Hopkins, there's only two people in history that we actually can compare Prabhupada to. This is Jesus and Muhammad. He said this at Harvard University. The only two people we can compare Prabhupada to are Jesus and Muhammad. He said, but when you make the comparison, actually, it's not quite fair because Jesus was in his own country with his own language, his own culture, and he had people of his own age to help him. Muhammad was his own country, his own language, his own culture, people and family members to help him. So Prabhupada was in a different country, different culture, different language, and no one was there to assist him at all. So he says, in this way, his contributions are truly unique. And then he goes on to talk about, various factors of that. But this was the opening keynote address at Harvard University about the contributions of Bhakti and particularly Prabhupada's stature. So we all have deep affection and love and respect and appreciation for Prabhupada. We should understand that even outside scholars looking at Prabhupada's contribution, it's not just a sentiment that we may hold because we follow Prabhupada, therefore we hold them in high esteem. Even people that are not members of ISKCON, when they look at Prabhupada's contributions, they're amazed to see what he did and what he accomplished, which gets us into those next series of discussion about how he taught and how it applies to today.
That is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I remember, my grandmother would say that even the family priest, they would not even cross rivers or leave their place, like Kshetra Sannyas. They would stick to their little areas and preach where they are. But Srila Prabhupada, in a time when people would not travel anywhere, at that ripe age, he decided that his compassion needs just he had no limitations. He was not fearful. He just had so much faith in the instructions of of his spiritual master. And he just went on as a messenger. Such a beautiful, like Vishaka Prabhu just mentioned, it started with dedication, determination, just amazing. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for setting that as a foundational principle of how Srila Prabhupada's compassion. And it's so important that we have the two of you here for a second generation devotee like me, who did not personally get to meet Srila Prabhupada in person. We see him through your eyes, through your words. How Srila Prabhupada engaged you, Vishaka Prabhu, in service, how he allowed you to be his photographer, how he encouraged everyone to participate, irrespective of their gender, age, shortcomings, how he encouraged each and every one of us to engage fully, absorb our minds in Krishna, and what kind of protection that was. Please elaborate a bit more about your interaction with Srila Prabhupada and how he encouraged you.
Yes, I think the best protection, as you indicated, is to be fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada received the name Abhay Charan, fearless, because he's at the lotus feet of Krishna. So if we can absorb our minds in Krishna, that is actual protection. We can become at least closer to being fearless, probably not to the extent of Srila Prabhupada, but certainly closer to that point. So if anyone is denied the opportunity of service, especially service according to their propensity, that's really a lack of protection. The mind becomes much more fixed and centered once we're using our God-given abilities in Krishna's service according to our propensities. And if that, due to gender or any other reason, is stopped, it's actually, in my view, a kind of violence to the person. because they're denied the ability, the facility, the encouragement to use what God has given them for God's service. So it's a disservice for anyone to prevent a devotee from serving to their full ability with full support and encouragement, guidance, whatever is required.
If I can just say, I think that's really critical because sometimes we hear these days, well, you know, particularly looking at women and others, perhaps, you know, can't do this, can't do this, can't do this, shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. But as Vishaka was pointing out, if devotees are engaged, whatever their gender, if they're engaged in Krishna service according to their capacity, that's the best protection. And devotees in leadership roles, if we're thinking, we read in the Shastra, okay, we're supposed to protect women and brahmanas and old men and children and all that. So if we're supposed to do that, that first and foremost means making sure people are engaged according to their propensity. And if we block someone from doing that, you use the word violence, I would endorse that analysis. It really is violent because you're preventing you, that leader, is then becoming a block to that devotees approaching and serving Krishna. Whereas the leader's role should be first and foremost to facilitate that. We're supposed to be servants of others, which would mean assisting them in their service to Krishna, not that we put artificial blocks or impositions in the way. So thank you for that, Vishaka.
That is beautiful. And, you know, we realize that how Srila Prabhupada, you know, we set the foundation by talking about how Srila Prabhupada was never that traditional follower. He went with compassion as the underlying theme of his life. And specifically when he started to share Krishna consciousness with the world. So how would we understand Srila Prabhupada's views on Varnashram in particular, and then compare it to Devi Varnashram, where everyone had a place and a role to play? And according to the propensities, they were encouraged, like we mentioned, true protection. How do we understand, you know, when people start looking at Prabhupada's comments in silos and they don't understand his mood as an overarching theme? How do we understand that?
Well,
And also, could you share some practical, you know, incidents, how Srila Prabhupada encouraged you in person to take up a responsibility or a service? Or
Krishna himself describes Varnashram as the system that he created. So it is a divine system. It comes from Krishna. And when he describes it in the 4th chapter of the Gita, he says a person works in society not according to birth, but according to their qualities and activities. He's very clear. So the caste system, which devolved in India as a result of Varnashram, unfortunately became very rigid according to birth, and they ignored qualities and activities. Prabhupada did not support that. That is not Krishna's system. He clearly says guna and karma. He does not mention janma. So birth as a woman is a janma. It's not qualities and activities. So by my understanding and by what I saw with Srila Prabhupada, he encouraged all his followers to work again according to their propensities, according to their God-given gifts. And in my case, I was interested in photography from a very young age. I majored in photography in college. So when I became a follower of Srila Prabhupada, naturally, he engaged me as a photographer of his followers and of himself. And my husband also in film. And so we were very happy in that service because that's what we love to do. And if we did it for Krishna, it was just so satisfying, incomparable to doing it for any non-devotional reason.
that is beautiful. I know once you shared, and I think you shared that in your book as well, how you were taking that famous picture when Prabhupada was performing Artik. I think it was at Krishna Balaram temple. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yes, that was the installation of Krishna Balaram. It was a great moment of victory for Srila Prabhupada. He had worked so hard to acquire the property, to build the temple. The devotees in America and other places in the world were distributing books, and much of that money went to India to build that temple and several other temples in India. A great sacrifice on the part of the devotees. So at that time, it was Ram Navami, 1975, and the temple room was completely packed. As you know, it's not a very large temple room. Everyone was just jammed in there. And I managed to squirm my way to the front. And there was just one person between me and a clear view of Srila Prabhupada as he offered the first arti to Krishna Balaram. That was Tripurari, who had just recently taken sannyas. And he was riveted. He was in rapt attention because he was one of the key book distributors who had worked tirelessly to distribute books and to have that money sent to the BBT and in turn sent to India to build that temple. And he saw this as just a momentous occasion for Srila Prabhupada, his victory. And he was completely fixed, absorbed in this first arti offered by Srila Prabhupada. So I had the bold step of tapping him on the shoulder. I made the bold step, and he just ignored it like I did not exist. And I tapped him quite firmly, which ordinarily I would never ever do to a sannyasi. And again, he ignored it. So then I held my camera over his shoulder and faced the lens towards him. And again, he ignored it like I didn't exist. So I was becoming increasingly desperate because this was such an important occasion to record photographically. So then I put my mouth right next to his ear because the kirtan was just deafening. And I said as loudly as I could, I yelled, "If you stand there, you can see Srila Prabhupada offering the arti. If you let me stand there, the whole world will see Srila Prabhupada offering the arti."
Hmm.
And he didn't move. He didn't move after that. And I wasn't going to give up. I was just thinking what next to do. But then after some long seconds, he just slipped aside and made space for me to take photographs. So I'm very grateful to him. He's a preacher. Tripurari Swami was and is a preacher. And so when he heard that little statement, he responded.
We're so very grateful because we could witness Prabhupada offering that first arti. If it wasn't for that picture, second generations like us and generations to come would never be able to witness that. So thank you. Thank you to both of you.
Govinda
You
Priya,
have
one
to
quick comment.
thank Tripurari Swami also.
Yes. Thank you.
One quick comment, because you mentioned this idea about as a second generation devotee. I think it's important. I make this point all the time. I came much later than Vishaka did. I was initiated, both initiations by Prabhupada, one of which in Vrindavan. But when I went to Vrindavan, there were thousands of devotees. So I never went on a morning walk. I never had a conversation other than reciting to Prabhupada what my vows were. I never had a letter. And yet somehow or other, by his grace, I'm engaged in his service so many years later. And I think it's important devotees today realize that aside from, say, Vishaka, she had so many years, as she describes in the books, when she was traveling with Prabhupada. Even the devotees who were there during Prabhupada's time, the vast majority of them, if you were in Dallas, you saw Prabhupada when he came to Texas once or twice, whatever it was. If you were in Chicago or if you were in New York, you didn't go with Prabhupada to Japan. You didn't go with Prabhupada to India. You didn't go to Prabhupada to UK. And these days, there's so many biographies and autobiographies and all the wonderful films that Vishaka and her husband have produced, and the photographs that you mentioned. There's and all the recorded lectures. I mean, this second generation, third generation, fourth, fifth, sixth have, in some ways, better opportunity to associate with Prabhupada than we did at that particular time. Those same resources are available to us today, the lectures, the videos, all of that. And those will continue. So sometimes devotees think, oh, I wish I had been there to have Prabhupada's association. But Prabhupada, by Krishna's grace, and, thank you, modern technology, it does a few good things well. So much of Prabhupada's teachings are there. So really are something that we should understand, have been captured for future generations for a long, long, long time to come.
Thank you. Sure, sure. When I was reading The Bond of Love, the I deeply felt that the Vaishnavis shared and poured their heart about how they felt in Srila Prabhupada's presence. And it was, I can tell you, I used to get goosebumps. I started to read them before going to bed, read Bond of Love before going to bed for 10, 15 minutes. And it was such a beautiful, I've heard so many memories, but when these Vaishnavis were sharing, there were details like, Srila Prabhupada looked through the corner of his eye, and this is how I felt. It was so much about how Prabhupada made them feel. He made them feel seen. He made them feel heard. He acknowledged their presence. He acknowledged their service. Um, so how do we really understand, these difficult statements, so-called difficult statements of Srila Prabhupada and Prabhupada as a person, as a Vaishnava, as this Acharya that was here to empower everyone, encourage everyone in the path of bhakti?
Vishaka, why don't you go first on that one?
Okay, I can try. Prabhupada does have many so-called difficult statements in his books and in some lectures as well. And I think one way to understand them is to realize that he did make a distinction between women who were devotees or aspiring devotees and women who were materialistic. He does that several times, like in the teachings of Queen Kunti and some of his purports in the Bhagavatam as well. So that, I think, is a critical difference. There's also a statement in one of his purports in the second canto, where he says there are millions and billions of men and women in the world, and all of them are less intelligent because they think they're their bodies. So he doesn't, he also says men who are like dogs, hogs, camels, and asses, So there's strong statements about everyone who's materialistically oriented, including women. And I think from that we can benefit, because once one enters Krishna's family, it's a different paradigm. And we shouldn't equate one who's part of that family with one who is still has materialistic goals and ambitions and is controlled by their senses and so on and so forth. That distinction is critical.
Thank you. Thank you.
I can just add, I think, a couple of things that Vishaka touched upon, and thank you for those. That's a new reference for me. Although sometimes I think in terms of, because Prabhupada regularly says men who are like dogs, hogs, camels, and asses. And if you want to read it literally, I don't know if he ever said women who are like dogs, hogs, camels, and asses. So I think we in men's bodies should think that when we're starting from the platform being dogs, hogs, camel, and asses repeatedly, Prabhupada makes comments about women that maybe we wonder rarely. But the comments about men being like dogs, hogs, camels, asses, he says on a regular basis. So we should maybe do some research and weigh that together sometime. We may find that may shed some light on the whole thing. A couple of things I think is really kind of gets to the crux of the matter in terms of, protection for women, protection for families, engaging women in Krishna consciousness, is that Prabhupada spoke so many things, so many lectures, so many letters were written, so many in his purports and his books and his walks and interviews with scholars and all that. We have to be very careful to make sure we look at the entire context of what Prabhupada's taught. And I think we will hopefully explore more about what he actually did. But, it's so important that we look at that we don't, pick one verse about one historical incident and then say, well, that's how things are supposed to be in the future. We put aside everything else Krishna said, put aside everything else Lord Chaitanya said and did, put aside everything else Prabhupada said and did. We're just going to choose one or two things, and that's going to be the foundation of our ideas. I think that's really narrow-minded, and I think we have to be very broad-minded as Prabhupada was in seeing how he really wanted to engage everyone. And as Vishaka said earlier, I mean, if we keep in mind this is Kali Yuga and how difficult it is to even practice Krishna consciousness, what to speak of spread Krishna consciousness, what to speak of maintain some purity within our movement, which is going to be challenged more and more and more as time goes on. We need, like they say, all hands on deck. We need all the help we can get. We can't be discriminating. Well, you're this type of person from this type of, country or social economic background or gender or race. Our work is too important. And we see that was very much Prabhupada's mood, that anybody had any kind of talent, even if you didn't have the talent, he would still assign the role to you and tell you, go out and make it work. So I think seeing everything in content, in the right context is properly. And also to, kind of understand some things in terms of the history and the situation where Prabhupada was in different, he would say different things to different people at different times. So why did he say that in a particular context, a particular time? We have to analyze things and not just kind of sometimes take things so superficially. And I mean, I think I'll just add this now if I can. Practically, like Vishaka is now the president of Bhaktivedanta Manor, you introduced her as the president of one of the most important temples in the UK. That was an understatement. She's the president of one of the most important temples in all of ISKCON. And maybe later she'll have a chance to share about the role that she plays in meeting the prime minister. And I don't know if she's met the king yet. I think maybe she hasn't. Very, very, and as a very advanced devotee who happens to be in a woman's body, that's no barrier. And in this day and age, it's actually an opportunity, which we'd be foolish to set that aside. And so I think that's really, really important. And in the past, it's definitely true. Some of the major problems we faced as a society, I believe, I've said it many times before, other people also say it, a lot of the problems that we face, social, especially some of the social problems, is because we somehow minimized the voice and the role of women. And I think a lot of times women are more perceptive on a lot of things in this world. And by discriminating against women from leadership roles or from being able to articulate their vision, their opinion on things, we're really blinding ourselves to the opportunities that are there to expand our movement. So I know where I'm as a GBC mentioned, I've got the Northeast United States now. I don't know what the count is now, something like 6 presidents that are women in my area, and then more in other parts of the country and around the world. And to just have some kind of discriminatory policy that, women can't do this, they can't do that. I mean, so it's kind of like if I want to go to the Jagannath Puri temple, I can't get in. The body, white men go home, or just white people in general, but that's not who we are.
Right.
We don't put the barriers. Our movement is about breaking down the barriers and allowing people to approach Krishna.
Yeah. Sometimes this famous Chanakya Pandit's verse, Dhol Gavar Shudra Pashunari, Sab Tadana Ke Adhikari. So there was a wonderful article that I read where it says Dhol, Gavar, Shudra, Pashu, and Nari. So he's talking about that all of these can be chastised. Okay, so he mentions over there that people misunderstand that when they're saying Nari, only women are to be chastised. However, Gavar, Shudra, and Pashu, the 3 places where men's name has been mentioned, because Srila Prabhupada referred to all of us as Shudras. Kali Yuga, everybody uses Shudra. Gavar, unintelligent. Prabhupada said, if you're not practicing Krishna consciousness, you're unintelligent. Only intelligent people practice Krishna consciousness. And Pashu means animal. So if you're only eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, you're leading an animalistic life. And this person had nothing to do with ISKCON. And he had written this article. He said, if you're thinking that based on this particular verse, you can chastise women, then 3 places great sages have mentioned men in general. So instead of Dhol, Gavar, Shudra, Pashu, Nari, your focus is only on Nari. What about the other 3? So that brings us to this point again, where, Srila Prabhupada is helping us rise above the conception of the body. And our philosophy is we're not the body, we're spiritual. A foundational principle is that. Then how can women be mistreated and be limited in their practice of bhakti. I find that contrary to Srila Prabhupada, Lord Chaitanya's teachings. How do we understand where such verses are actually used to mistreat Vaishnavis or abuse Vaishnavis? Take things like domestic violence, take things like, in the name of protecting, like women are supposed to be controlled, children are supposed to be controlled in the form of giving them punishment for correction. How do we understand this in context to our scriptures? Anuttama Prabhu.
Ladies first, ladies first.
Well, first and foremost, the process of yoga means to control the mind, right? That's the first job of any yogi, is to control the mind. I'm just now rereading the third canto of the Bhagavatam, Lord Kapila's instructions to his mother Devahuti. And he mentions that due to false ego, we have the propensity to lord it over. And so I think it's very easy to have this perverted idea that I'm lording it over someone else for their benefit, when actually it's my false ego simply wanting to lord it over. And it's the due to this uncontrolled, untrained mind, which is far from the mode of goodness, rather embroiled in passion and ignorance. And if we don't have the perspective, the humility, the guidance, the knowledge to understand that, we live a deluded life, thinking that we're trying to serve in some devotional way. It's a very unfortunate situation to be in, very unfortunate. And people really need help if they have that misconception.
I think just to add to that, Prabhupada sometimes would compare, we're like a hospital. So people are coming to Krishna conscious, we're bringing all of our past experiences, our conceptions of life. And sometimes we look for scripture to back up what we want to do, what we want to be. It's kind of like the experience someone might be giving a Bhagavatam class, and if we're not careful, we may be sitting here in the class thinking, I hope she heard that part of what he just said. Or I hope he just heard that part of what she said. Oh, so-and-so, Vishnu needs to learn about humility. That's glad they're pointing that out. And, whatever, Radha Devi, she needs to hear about being more enthusiastic, rather than thinking it's for me. I'm the one that's supposed to be not here judging everybody else in the room, but I should be hearing this in the mood of how I can do better. But instead, I think sometimes people, we bring these things in, and if I'm in a man's body and I read something about men have a broad shoulder mentality. Well, that I may misinterpret it and think that means I have this authority that I don't necessarily have. My authority is I'm a servant to the servant to the servant to the servant. That's what the teachings explain to us. So I think we have to be very aware and self-critical about what we're bringing with us. I have this conversation with people quite often. Sometimes people say, well, we're meant to establish the Vedic culture. But then the question is, which Vedic culture? Lord Ramachandra's Vedic culture, Krishna's Vedic culture, Lord Chaitanya's, Vedic culture was there when Lord Chaitanya was there, when Prabhupada was there. And I think it's very difficult to sort that out. I mean, Vishaka mentioned the third canto Bhagavatam. I think it's the seventh canto, right? Narada Muni says brahmachari should dress in tree bark, which is just a wonderful example of how obviously there's a principle behind that. You talk about being unintelligent. I mean, what's more unintelligent than not understanding the principle behind something and simply trying to, force feed sometimes the externals. So the principle is there, okay, the specific brahmachari should wear tree bark. Well, what's the principle is they should dress simply, they should not be caught up in fashion and all those different kind of things. That's what we can bring into the modern time. So I think it's really important that we keep that in mind, that Prabhupada, I think a good measuring stick for us is is not if something is Vedic or not. That sometimes can be argued. Is something Vaishnava? And is it following in the example that Prabhupada gave us? That's the real question. You know, is this Vaishnava culture? Because we can find all kinds of things that are Vedic culture of times gone by that maybe they don't fit into Lord Chaitanya's movement, into Prabhupada's movement, into the 21st century. We have to really see what is Vaishnava, and that begins, you know, the Bhagavad Gita. Humility, qualities of knowledge starts with humility. So if we keep that in mind, we can be a lot more cooperative. If we're not aware that I may do certain things and think of certain things, have a certain perspective because that's the way I was raised, whether it's in India or the UK or in America. So some of those things can be used for Krishna. You know, a lot of things in say in America, for instance, where I live, there's a lot of good things we can use. You know, the entrepreneurship, Prabhupada appreciated that, the enthusiasm, the conviction that yes, we can change the world, the willingness to look at new ideas. Those are all things that Prabhupada very much appreciate because they're Vaishnava qualities, not because they're American qualities. And similarly, there's things in Indian culture that are wonderful and so closely aligned, obviously, with Krishna consciousness. It's the root culture. But there may be things that exist in India today that don't line up, or things in the UK that don't line up. And so we have to kind of have this filter of what does it really mean to be a Vaishnava, taught by our Vaishnava Acharyas, first and foremost, Srila Prabhupada, and accept and reject on that basis. And I think if we see like that, a lot of what I think are kind of nonsensical behaviors and cultural patterns, they're quickly cast aside because we can see this isn't Vaishnava. It's not Vaishnava to discriminate. It's not Vaishnava to say you can't do this service. It's not Vaishnava to say who can chant. My opinion, it's not the perfection of Vaishnava culture to say who can chant which mantras given by Prabhupada to us if they're qualified by all other respects other than their occupation or their gender. You know, these things, sometimes they trickle in with all good intention, I'm sure, but that's where we have to be self-critical to make sure we're really closely aligned with Prabhupada.
Beautiful. Really. This is really what brings us to Prabhupada as a person, you know, understanding the mood of Srila Prabhupada and how he gave different instructions at different times to different devotees based on their individual limitations, their situations. Vishaka Prabhu, would you like to share with us some incidents of how Srila Prabhupada protected women and children? And how should leaders in our society today protect women and children? Taking an example of Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I would start by saying Prabhupada protected all his followers by giving them knowledge, not just women and children, but men also. That this knowledge that Prabhupada gave is invaluable. Just the idea that we're not the body, we're spirit soul, we have an eternal relationship with Krishna that's imbued with love, that we can access that relationship by changing our habits, by engaging in sadhana. This is actual protection. Otherwise, we're floundering in the material world with no actual idea of what the purpose of life is, what to speak of how to achieve that purpose. So that's in a general way. And then more specifically for women, he encouraged women to get married to a qualified man, a compatible man. That's also a kind of protection for sure. He encouraged women to engage according to their propensities, another type of protection. On a practical level, in India, very often he would make sure that women had facilities that they needed to live. They would make sure that they had, we were in New Vrindavan in the evening, there was a darshan of Srila Prabhupada outside. And at one point, Srila Prabhupada looked around at one woman who didn't have a chadar. She was wearing sari with a choli. And he said, "Are you feeling cold?" And she was so shocked, she didn't know what she was, speechless. And Prabhupada turned to the temple president, Praladri. He said, you must ask them every month if they need anything. They may not come to you, but you must ask them if there's anything that they need. And as a result of that question, that devotee who he asked if you're feeling cold. She opened a thrift store in New Vrindavan that she had for 30 years so that anyone could get things that they needed at a very reasonable price for living in New Vrindavan. That was her inspiration, just that question. It touched her so much. So Prabhupada was very aware of his disciples and what they were going through and concerned for them. And that was also a kind of protection to know that Prabhupada's love was there for each and every one of his followers.
Vishaka, I think just to expand on that a little bit, sometimes as devotees, and I'm becoming aware now, I'm almost 70, and I'm becoming unhappy these days to see that some of the misunderstandings and mistakes that were made years and years ago seem to be coming back again. And I'm kind of thinking, I thought we took care of that. And didn't everybody learn from the mistakes we made? So I think there is a tendency sometimes to think protection or provision for devotees means you take care of their spiritual lives. But here's an example, probably very concerned about her physical well-being and that she's warm enough on a cool night. So leaders, whether they're parents or spouses or temple authorities or, GBC, whatever their role is, have to keep in mind that our job is to, in terms of protection and providing for devotees, all ask, physical needs, emotional needs, intellectual needs, certainly spiritual needs, and not that sometimes we divorce those from each other. They all need to go together to support that. And I think of a situation a few years ago, I was at a temple and I saw, in this case, it happened to be a mother was with her child, maybe 8 or 10 years old, and a lecture was about to begin. And the mother told the child, sit down and be quiet. Like for the next 45 minutes, they're going to sit for a lecture that's obviously geared to adults, and it's not meant for children. And in this particular place, there was no other activities offered. There was no coloring books and crayons going around at that time. So that child's going to grow up thinking that I don't like coming to the temple, whatever, how often they come. So rather than, the parent trying to think they know what's good for the child, pushing or forcing, as sometimes happened in the past at some of our families and schools, the adult thinking, well, you have to be Krishna conscious the way I am. I chant so many rounds of japa. You have to chant so many rounds of japa. And the net effect is it has the opposite effect. It has a negative effect. So it's very important that, again, goes back to what you said earlier, understanding people's individual needs and desires and propensities for engaged in service. And if we try to take somebody that really, really wants to worship the deities, force them to go out and, approach people in the public and sell books, or we take somebody that's really, really good at selling books and loves to interact with people, tell them, no, you have to be on the altar for the rest of your, in the next 5 years, you don't talk to anybody except God, if he's willing to reciprocate with you in that way. It's foolishness. And it is violent. I mean, it's a strong word, but it is in one sense really violent to people. So it's important that we be sensitive to what people's needs are, engage them properly.
So beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. The nourishment that you'll receive from Srila Prabhupada and over the years of sharing that care and protection with others, you're empowered. Like Anuttama Prabhu was just sharing with us how, as the temple president for Bhaktivedanta Manor, you have been able to achieve so much, not only for the community, but meet such influential people and spread the glories of the Lord in such a way. Would you please share with us how, in spite of being in a female body, you're still able to share, and how having a female body is really not restricting in any way for the nourishment that you've received from Srila Prabhupada and so many other devotees?
Well, when I first came to the manor, I was expecting some prejudice, some bias against me because of my gender. And I was very pleasantly surprised that there was very little of that. And I was confused also because it wasn't what I was used to in ISKCON. But then I thought that all the people at the manor, their entire lives, they've lived under the Queen at that time. Now she's passed away, but she was there for 70 years. And so they grew up on every postage stamp, every coin, every bill. there's a picture of the Queen, and she was revered. She was very popular in the eyes of the people. And so it wasn't such a big leap for them to have a woman temple president. So she really paved them, very indebted to the, to the Queen. She paved the way.
That is interesting. Wow, that's such a beautiful perspective. Well, we have the Queen of Raja that we all are surrendered to. So Srimati Radharani, even Krishna is subordinate to her. So thank you for bringing that up. But please share more about how you are able to attend, meet such influential people, and share the wisdom from the scriptures.
Yeah, as you may know, some years ago, this is maybe in the 1980s and 90s, the local village next to the temple was so flooded with traffic that they objected to the presence of Bhaktivedanta Manor. And so there was a 10-year campaign to save the manor. And as a result of that campaign, the manor got another entrance. That entrance to the village is now closed except for pedestrians. And the entrance for cars is on the opposite side. And so to get that, the manor had to purchase a lot of land, or 78 acres. Originally it was 17 when George Harrison donated it. And as a result, we have so much land that we can accommodate many, many people, and many, many people are coming by word of mouth. The news has gotten out of the manor's existence. So it's become a force to contend with as far as temples in the UK. And we've gotten attention from politicians who want the votes of all those people. We're talking about 60,000 people for Janmashtami. And we're expecting a huge number also for Diwali coming up. And so once you get that kind of force behind you, and with it, they naturally give donations so we can make improvements at the temple, like visitor center and so on. We get the notice of politicians. They want the votes, and with the politicians come the royalty in the UK. And Keir Starmer, who's now Prime Minister, visited us a couple of years ago, and he was noting that in the manor's history, which is now 50 years, they only had, this was the first woman temple president. And he thought that was something remarkable and to be commended. And I think his mood is shared by many because women are becoming prominent in all areas of society, and they expect that in the temple as well.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Anuttama Prabhu, you travel and you attend so many interfaith delegations. What is your experience over there? What is the women representation in faith-based organizations, and how does that relate to what we have within our society?
Well, first, not just faith-based organizations, but we're recording this. I'm in Colombia, South America, attending the COP16, which is a conference on biodiversity. And 2 days ago, we had a meeting among the faith leaders. There's a whole faith contingency here that's under the coordination and direction of Gopal Patel, who's also a practicing Vaishnava member of ISKCON. But it's a very diverse group, and we had a meeting with the woman, Astrid Schumacher, who was the head of the whole biodiversity conference. There's 17,000 people here, and the person in charge is a woman. And many of the delegations, whether they're representing countries or interfaith groups or corporations, many of them are led by women. There's no question about it. And I think that, as we talked about earlier, to not be fully enthusing and facilitating to tap into the resources that women bring to our society in the places where we don't do that is a big holding us back. And certainly, in India, for example, the current party in power, the BJP, they're very much one of their platforms, for lack of a better word, is the empowerment of women, engaging women more and more and more. So it's something that goes on all around the world. As Vishaka mentioned, the Queen was there for 70 years. UK's also had women prime ministers. America hasn't gotten to that point yet, but at least 2 women have run for that office. The head of major political parties. So, I don't know when this is going to air. Maybe it will already be decided. At this point, it hasn't been decided. But I think that's really important. Women play very, very important roles in society at large. And when we don't have women do the same in our society, it causes people to question, why are you doing this? What's the role? Are you discriminating? And I think the key focus of this conversation is, where's that coming from? It's not coming from our founder, Charya. Any policies that have the net effect of actually discriminating against or not fully facilitating women, it's not Prabhupada's mood. And I think sometimes what happens is people will go, we mentioned this earlier, they'll go and they'll find a particular scriptural reference, but how did Prabhupada apply that? You know, you may say, okay, you know, we came up earlier, Vishaka quoted about how everyone in this age, men and women, are unintelligent. There's other quotes Prabhupada mentions, you know, women are less intelligent. Okay, spiritually, Prabhupada talks about anyone who takes to Krishna consciousness becomes intelligent. And Prabhupada himself certainly empowered women with all kinds of very, very important responsibilities without discrimination. So if we, because of my cultural background, my own issues, and it's a fact, frankly, I think sometimes, I mean, we're human beings. Let's discuss this in an open, honest way. If I had a great loving relationship with my mother, there's probably a much better chance I'm not threatened by empowering women. I mean, I can't say that's across the board. I'm not a psychologist, but I've seen that. Again, things that we bring in from our own cultural background and our family experiences, sometimes they have an impact upon us. And I think we have to set that all aside and see, how did Prabhupada interact with women? How he was concerned about Vaishnavis' well-being, how he engaged Vaishnavis without discrimination. And he empowered Vaishnavis, as we see, you know, still happening today. Thank you to the UK Yatra for their wonderful example of allowing Vishaka to come there. They not just allowed, they headhunted her amongst probably all kinds of other people that they could have had. So it's a big yacht. It's an important place. It's a great place. It looks, many people would have liked that service, and they chose her because they could see that she actually had the capacity and the abilities and the skills that were necessary, and the Krishna consciousness. So I'm glad they were broad-minded enough, and my obeisance to the Queen for them creating this kind of culture, that the UK was more open-minded for that.
It's beautiful, really beautiful. You know, we've been having this conversation for almost an hour, but to wrap up our discussion here today, what would you suggest that individuals, as members of the society of this Hare Krishna movement, as individuals, as leaders, we all have our area of influence. How can we play our part in protection of every aspiring, for every aspiring individual that would want to practice Krishna consciousness? How do we encourage and inspire them?
I start again.
Please.
I think it's so important to be personal and to treat each person as a unique individual, which means spending time with them, hearing from them, encouraging them. I call Prabhupada the personification of encouragement. If you read his letters and hear so many of his conversations, so often he was just encouraging the devotees. There's a beautiful exchange that he had that I refer to regularly because I find it so powerful. It was in the 70s when book distribution was at its height, and some very successful book distributors came together, a few of them, and they had this idea that they would travel throughout the world and train neophyte book distributors how to successfully distribute Srila Prabhupada's books. So they went to Srila Prabhupada with this idea and explained to him that they could teach these newcomers to book distribution what to say so people stop walking, what to say so that they hold the book, what to say so that they give a donation, etc. And Prabhupada heard them attentively, and then he said, you simply teach the devotees to be sincere, and Krishna from within their heart, he will give them the words, what to say. In other words, he was saying, don't program them, but inspire them so that they're sincere, and then Krishna will help. So I think that's so important for each of us to to try as best we can to be sincere, as Anuttama Prabhu was saying, to try to leave our baggage, our conditioning behind, and really absorb ourselves in Prabhupada's example, not just his written words, but his way that he lived those words. And then protection will be there for us. Our own Krishna consciousness will be protected and will naturally protect those who are in our circle of influence.
Govinda Priya, I think that one of the challenges that we face, and we're, as Vishaka said earlier, we're a community that's based on knowledge and based on our trying to humbly be servants of our predecessors, Acharya, and especially Srila Prabhupada. I mean, there is in some quarters this idea that I've heard people say directly to me that, well, the things that Prabhupada did in terms of empowering a wide variety of people, in terms of some of the ways that particularly engaging Vaishnavis in service, he did that because it was an emergency. He did that because of your fallen nature, you people of the West and women in general, perhaps. And he kind of got away from what really we should be doing in his behavior. And we have to go back and see what the scripture says. And the scripture clearly, they would argue, I would disagree, points to the position that men should take the preeminent role, and that women necessarily aren't qualified to engage in an equal way. And they'll say, I've heard this again, don't look at what Prabhupada did, just see what Prabhupada said. And I think, and I hope Vishaka can reflect on this as well, because she's more of a scholar and a thoughtful person than I am. But this idea, who are we to say that what Prabhupada did doesn't apply? He's the Acharya. We talk about studying the Bhagavatam. There's the book Bhagavat, but then there's the person Bhagavat. And we can only understand really the scripture through the Acharyas. And Prabhupada is our founder Acharya. He's the one that put the structure together for all of ISKCON for the next 10,000 years or so. Certainly he didn't concoct anything. He's bringing down what he's heard, as we heard opening is essential connection with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So he's bringing that all forward. But as an Acharya, he's putting it in the context of how do we apply these things in the modern world? How do we take these ancient teachings, often which the particular examples, as I mentioned, the brahmachari is wearing tree bark. The example there is goes way back. It's a whole different milieu. So Prabhupada told us, okay, 16 rounds. Prabhupada showed us I can cross the ocean to preach. Prabhupada talks about those earliest marriages where he himself performed the marriage. And I think he writes about this in the Bhagavad Gita, I even believe, that, sannyasi is really not supposed to be engaged in marrying people, but it's a necessary ritual for the vast majority of people to be purified and to live in a stable social environment and to bring children into the world and train them as Vaishnavas and all that. So he showed us how to apply this scripture, and especially according to time, place, and circumstance. So the idea that I can go back with my limited intelligence and say, I'm going to second guess what Prabhupada did, or even put it aside because I think I know what he really meant. He didn't really mean what he said. He didn't really mean what he did. What he meant was my interpretation of the scripture. That's where he meant to go. And that's very dangerous. It's very dangerous. I think particularly this is something that the first generation of devotees, hopefully we can pass this on to the second, third, and fourth. The preeminent role of Srila Prabhupada. And he does have a preeminent role. He's the one that brought Krishna consciousness, Vaishnavism all around the world. He's the one that made a GBC work. He's the one that empowered women. He's the one that translated and commented on so many literatures and had them translated into so many languages. He's the one that inspired young artists, some of whom were about as good as artists when they started, maybe as I would be even today. I'm pretty terrible, but by his mercy and their sincerity, became wonderful artists. He encouraged devotees to do theater. He encouraged, schools for children, he encouraged cow protection, he encouraged living on the land. At the same time, he opened almost the vast majority of his temples, he opened in cities. Even though he said living on the land is such a priority, it's in the 7 purposes, and simple life, living and all of that emphasized. So, phenomenal representative Krishna and pure genius. Even materialistic persons have to say, his leadership was on the level of genius. So who are we to go back and second guess? Well, he said certain things he wanted us to do. He acted in certain ways. We're going to set those aside and go back to our interpretation of the scripture, often pulling in scriptural references that are not particularly important for Vaishnavas that Prabhupada rarely, if ever, quoted, and use those as the lens by which we're going to interpret what he said, rather than the lens really should be what he did. That's how we understand the tradition, how we should apply it ourselves moving forward. So I think that's a critical point when you talk about protection and making a society that is a personal society and focused on our individually, not projects over people, but people over projects.
Beautifully said. You know, Prabhupada, right from Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, you know, they give so much importance to being relevant and relatable. That's why he mentioned to Srila Prabhupada that you know English, you should preach in English. He could have said, no, stick to your Sanskrit, because that is the language of the devatas, or that is the language that is spoken by holy people. But no, staying relevant and relatable, and how we can, that was the mood of our acharyas, and that's what Srila Prabhupada imbibed from his spiritual master, that at the ripe age of 70 as a sannyasi, crossed oceans, had performed marriages, empowered, traveled. There's so many wonderful pastimes that we read of how he introduced Malati Prabhu in that assembly with his godbrothers, that explaining that this is the dedication of all my disciples, including women, and I can do anything for them and they can do anything for me. So that was the mood of Srila Prabhupada, and that is, and he carried that mood from Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and my understanding is that he expects all of us to carry that mood. You know, to be relevant and relatable, if we are going to, in this day and age, if we are going to think that 50 to 60% of the population, we're not going to engage them because they're born in a female body, that just doesn't make sense to anyone. I mean, it's like you're running, even if you just think, even if you don't think with that perspective of spirituality, of any of that, if you have an organization, if you say that I'm not going to employ 50 or engage 50 to 60% of the population, how are you going to continue with the work of the organization? Prabhupada did everything that was practical and relevant. And I think that's what he expected all of us to. And of course, we have the depth of his personality, his instructions. And like you mentioned, we have to not just read what was written, but actually hear and see what he did. So thank you so much for sharing these wonderful insights.
Yes, I'd really like to hear Vishaka's reflection on that idea of Prabhupada as Acharya, Prabhupada as author, Prabhupada as person Bhagavat. What are your thoughts and reflections on that?
Well, I think if Prabhupada wanted us to change what he presented, both in his books and by his personal example, then he would have said so. But he did not say so no one has brought forward any statement, written or recorded, where he said, okay, after some time, then you can change it in this way or that way. So it's truly speculation. And as you say, it's very dangerous and unnecessary territory to enter for the future of ISKCON, the present of ISKCON. It's very detrimental, I think.
In fact, if I remember correctly, Prabhupada said that do not speculate. Just follow what I've given you. In fact, there's contrary statements like this that Prabhupada actually mentioned. Anuttama Prabhu, what about you? Please share your reflections on.
Well, I think this idea about part of it is the emphasis on, we are a personal movement. And sometimes I find it interesting. I have some Buddhist colleagues so soft-hearted and so concerned about the suffering of the world, and so concerned about ethical interactions between people and no belief in the soul. It's like when you reach real, self-realization, I don't know, there are different varieties according to different Buddhist schools, but there's no sense of eternality of the soul, which we have. We say the individual has an eternal relationship with Krishna, is loved by Krishna. Paramatma comes with us throughout so many different births. Every single person is a part and parcel of Krishna and has an eternal relation with Krishna. That means they're dear to Krishna. So, sometimes we have had a history of, we get caught up in trying to achieve things for Krishna, not understanding, well, who are they for? I know recently I was involved with one temple that was expanding, and there was quite a discussion. Some of the leadership was very much focused on, well, we're going to expand our temple and create more facilities for people to come, devotees to come. Others were more focused on, no, we have to kind of build this temple because, it's sacred and ultimately it's going to help so many people, but with an emphasis on build the temple. And it kind of came down to sacrifice programs, sacrifice facilities, and, cut money on the Sunday feast and cut holidays, celebrations that don't necessarily make money, because we've got to save every penny to build the temple. But what won the day was, no, but let's keep in mind, what is the purpose of the temple? I mean, Krishna is very kind. He's appeared in the deity form to accept our worship. But why has he appeared in the deity form? To give people a chance to come and see him and get purified and chant the holy names and take his prasadam, all of that. So that we need to always keep in mind that the movement really exists to try to facilitate individuals reconnecting with Krishna. And to whatever extent, if there is some type of misapplication culturally or philosophically or socially, we don't let this type of people come and have Krishna's association, whether it's, because of their race or their gender or their nationality, whatever it is. We really, I think, if that happens widespread, and we've certainly had tendencies in that in the past, if that happens, I think we really lost the core or the key of what it means to be Vaishnavas. And we see in the world today, there's so much conflict. There's so much polarization. There's so much sense of you're with me or you're against me. You're one of us or you're not one of us. And in America, where I live, this sense of, Americans versus immigrants. And it's so bizarre because the country is full of 99% are immigrants. The only people that aren't immigrants are the Native Americans, which are one of the people who's been so poorly mistreated in the past couple centuries. So the idea of thinking, well, as Ishopanishad teaches us, it's all Krishna's property, and we're all Krishna's parts and parcels, and everybody should be given full facility. And especially a movement like ours that's meant to provide some kind of spiritual leadership and example. These values of facilitating everyone without discrimination, it's who we are. It really is who we are. And if we forget that, I think we've lost our core identity. There's so many rituals in the world. There's so many religious communities that say we have the higher truth and this and that. I think as Vaishnavas, we appreciate any sincere, genuine experience of God according to their own culture. And we're looking for ways how we can have a more inclusive community for all and give it's Lord Chaitanya's movement, right? He went out in the streets to get people the chance to chant Hare Krishna. And the powers that be wanted to stop him. No, you can't go out in the street. You can't do that. And Prabhupada crossed the ocean to go out even more in the street, even lower levels of the street to get people to chant Hare Krishna consciousness. And then he went to San Francisco, even his New York followers, before my time, we learned Leela Amrita. The New York devotees were like, well, Swami, you can't go to the mantra rock dance. That's kind of beneath you. And this isn't really appropriate. Like that. Probably like, no, there's people there. There's souls there. We can go. We can give them Krishna consciousness. And the beautiful stories of the first devotees that were in Africa, when Prabhupada came there, they said, Prabhupada, we're having difficulty attracting the African people there. There's Indians here that want to hear from us. And Prabhupada said, no, you go and you rent a space. You find some facility in the black part of town. And we're going to go there because that's why we're here. It's nice you're preaching Indians, but we came here for the Africans. So then when they had their program, there's hardly anybody there. No local people were there. No African people were there. So Prabhupada said, open the doors and start kirtan. And within a few minutes, the room was filled with people, African people who were attracted to music. So Prabhupada was like, how can we attract everybody? What are the cultural aspects? What are the different ways we can make sure everyone feels welcome, everyone feels engaged, everyone is attracted, everyone can be engaged in Krishna consciousness. And that's the mood of our founder Acharya. And if we separate that from who ISKCON is, I think we're in big trouble.
We have regular programs here at the University of California in Davis. And some of the students were sharing that the two main things that they want to know before they come to any kind of program, especially faith-based programs, is how do you treat the women and how do you treat the environment? These two things are extremely crucial for the next generation. They want to see, does your religion talk about protecting the environment? Are you conscious of that fact? And are you truly looking at everyone at the level of the soul? Whether you are a man, a woman, or you don't know at this point. So,
Hare Krishnas are here at the United Nations Conference on Biodiversity to try to learn and to try to understand how we can do more. It's important. I'll just take a quick chance to put in a plug, ISKCONenvironment.org. We have a group of devotees around the world that are concerned to make sure we're practically applying we practice what we preach. So you can go there, ISKCONenvironment.org, and find out more about that. We put the whole structure together with the consultation of Vishaka. She gave us great feedback how we can set standards for temples. So encourage devotees to get involved in that aspect as well.
that is phenomenal. Thank you. Yeah, I've looked at that. It's amazing, the work, the resources that are shared over there. And our temples are definitely moving into that direction of buying,
Reusable.
and reusable. Exactly. And also, and empowering everyone. So with that note, and with immense gratitude to Srila Prabhupada for what he has given us an opportunity to perfect our lives and encourage everyone to do the same. We'd like to end our conversation here today, and it's really grateful. Thank you so much, Vishaka Devi, for being here. Thank you, Anuttama Prabhu, for being here.
Govinda Priya, may I be so bold as to ask if we can ask Vishaka if she has any last thoughts on this, because she's done a lot of studying,
Absolutely.
a lot of research.
Please. Absolutely.
So a couple more minutes. I've kind of said everything I could, but I'd really like to see if there's more she would like to add.
Please, Vishaka Prabhu.
Well, one point is that if we look in the transcendental realm, like Krishna and his expansions, one of his expansions, as you mentioned, is Srimati Radharani, who's imbued with inconceivable love for Krishna. And we can look at that model. And then she herself has so many expansions, like Lakshmi, but also Durga. Durga is another expansion who keeps us in this material world due to our consciousness or lack of cooperation with Krishna. And so each of us, each living entity, especially, of course, as human beings, we have a choice if we want to keep ourselves under Durga's jurisdiction and be ruled by the modes of nature, or if we want to put ourselves under Lakshmi and Radharani's jurisdiction and come in the embrace of their love. So it's something that we can meditate on and look to and make a conscious choice day by day, moment by moment, which energy of Krishna's we want to be surrounded by.
Beautiful. Wow. Thank you. Would you like to add anything, Anuttama Prabhu?
I don't think I have anything else to add other than just we carry we have been empowered and asked by Prabhupada to carry forward a great mission. And we have to try to see things in the broader context of how to bring Lord Chaitanya's mood and Prabhupada's mood into the modern world. And to be really prepared to set aside whatever in ourselves, whatever in our communities blocks that, and to accept whatever within our guiding principles, of course, of truthfulness, cleanliness, mercy, austerity, self-discipline, how we can actually bring that forward and to make sure that things that maybe are uncomfortable for me don't get in the way of what's necessary to push on Prabhupada's movement. The same way many of us born in the West, I mean, I was raised on, the four regular, the first time I went to the Hare Krishna temple I was a college student, and they told me about the four regulative principles, and I asked them, well, what do you do? If you don't do those things, what do you do? I mean, it's like, but you become a devotee, you give those up because you have a higher vision. So in the same way, we may come with various perspectives on men's roles and women's roles that are very inclusive and very empowering, and that's wonderful. We can directly use those in Krishna service and facilitate others. If we come from a particular family or culture or religious background before we became Vaishnavas that maybe discriminates or sees people as, second-class citizens or not as capable as I am for whatever reason, we have to give that up. Same way we gave up a lot of the baggage we talked about earlier, that we have to give away that baggage. So we all have to give up whatever that baggage is. It stops us from going to Krishna. And if our movement's really going to manifest the potency that Prabhupada invested in us into the future, we've got a really sacred mission. We have to make sure we don't close the door on anybody.
It's amazing when you mention that, how as a college student, you were thinking about how am I going to follow these four regs? And I'm thinking here that I was born in a family of, they're initiated in the Sri Sampradaya, but I had no interest in practicing what they were practicing. It took somebody from Chicago to inspire me to take to what I was, seeing from birth. So Prabhupada really had a way of how to make things practical. I was seeing my parents worship, but there was no scientific understanding of why things were happening and how things were happening. So someone from Chicago who was inspired by Prabhupada had to come to India to inspire me to take to the process of bhakti. And that's the beauty of Krishna consciousness. And this is the beauty of what Srila Prabhupada has made everything so practical and relevant for all of us and allowing us to really perfect our lives. So I could have been born in a Brahmin family and really not taken up to anything. But it was the mercy of Prabhupada keeping the philosophy relevant. And we carry that responsibility as members of the society and as leaders to keep that mood of being relevant and relatable, presenting Krishna consciousness in such a way that it is palatable to everyone, and everyone is encouraged to take to that process. Thank you so much for this conversation. It has been so nourishing for me, and I'm sure it's going to be nourishing for all our viewers as well. Heartfelt gratitude to ISKCON Vaishnavi Ministry for bringing these panel discussions yearly and playing a part in having such meaningful conversations that are uplifting, that are reminding us of the mood of Srila Prabhupada. Gratitude to Karuna Shakti, who's been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, Radha Prabhu that heads the Vaishnavi Ministry, and to all the representatives worldwide. Thank you so much, Anuttama Prabhu and Vishaka Prabhu, for being here.
Our gratitude to you, Govinda Priya, for hosting us.
So,
Thank you,
thank you so much.
Vishaka, for the wonderful example, and please give our best regards to the King and the Prime Minister.
Thank you so much. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki. Jai.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Rama